There have been a number of conversations surrounding what to do about 10 million people who are in the country illegally after the change in the presidency that many Americans are hoping for. So, if President Trump returns to the Oval Office, he has promised the largest deportation force in the history of deportation forces. And so, a lot of think tanks and analysts and thought leaders have sat down to try to figure out if that's exactly what will be necessary. And it turns out, if you look historically, that's not actually needed. The Christian Science Monitor has an article by John Dillon from July 6th of 2006. This is a long time ago. And he was talking about then President George W. Bush being actually not the first Republican to face a full blown immigration crisis at the US Mexican border. This article goes all the way back to 53 years ago, then, when newly elected Dwight Eisenhower moved into the White House. It was America's southern frontier. That's what they called it. And it was as porous as a spaghetti sieve. You had 3 million illegal aliens walking and wading northward over a period of several years, taking jobs in California, Arizona, Texas, and points beyond. At that time, President Eisenhower cut off this illegal traffic. He did it quickly and decisively, and he only used 1,075 U.S. Border Patrol agents. That's less than one tenth of the force that was represented in 2006. So the idea that we need a lot more agents is something that's been discussed by the Biden administration. Karine Jean-Pierre has had her talking points on almost a daily basis. Whenever she's asked about immigration, she points to a lack of Border Patrol agents, which Democrats usually run on and advocate for funding for Border Patrol agents. But then when the funding is given to DHS, they actually use that money on other things. They don't hire new agents. And Border Patrol agents and their union have been complaining about that for decades. So if you look at it, what do we need? What's actually needed here? Is it the largest deportation force? And I'm not here to argue with President Trump about his plans and what he's going to do when he takes office. Perhaps he's thought about this. He had some experts. In fact, Tom Homan is a good friend of our program over at SiriusXM. He comes on frequently to talk about immigration. I've met him before. I know he's very serious about securing the border and making safe and lawful migration into the United States what it used to be during the Trump administration. But there's also the historical piece to it, that looking back, actually considering what has been done in the past, and the most effective, cost effective, and orderly way of righting what has been done wrong and incorrectly during the Biden administration. So there's little to no record of what he did to stop the influx of illegal aliens in his official papers, but there is one piece of historic evidence that indicates how he felt. In 1951, he wrote a letter to Senator William Fulbright, who was a Democrat from Arkansas. The senator had just proposed that a special commission be created by Congress to examine unethical conduct by government officials who accepted gifts and favors in exchange for special treatment of private individuals. You see where this is going, right? So General Eisenhower, who was gearing up for his run for the presidency, said amen to Senator Fulbright's proposal. He then quoted a report in the New York Times highlighting one paragraph that said the rise in illegal border crossings by Mexican, I won't use that term here on television, it's a slur, to a current rate of more than 1 million cases a year has been accompanied by a curious relaxation in ethical standards, extending all the way from the farmer exploiters of this contraband labor to the highest levels of the federal government. Does that sound familiar to you? There is a weakening and cheapening of the American labor force, not because these people who are coming in are terrible people. Their immigration status doesn't automatically make them terrible people. They break the law to get in, but they're coming here because the border is wide open, and there are ads running on all of their media telling them that now is the time to enter the United States, that President Biden wants them here, that there are jobs here that Americans won't do. And if they come here, they can not only supply food to their family that stays behind, but they can support themselves and start a new way of life. If you're living in a third world country where gangs run everything and there's no real government, and you want to work for a living and actually have a house that has finished floors and air conditioning, you'd be willing to make 1,000-mile journey as well. But they're being lied to. There aren't an abundance of jobs here in the United States that Americans won't do. That's a lie and a marketing tool of the left. And if we want to stop what is now a regulated, migratory, and controlled invasion into the United States, we have to stop the NGOs from running those ads. And we have to stop this ideological warfare using words that have been bastardized to change their meaning as to what it is that is the draw for this migration. The WEF wants the end of all borders because how do you control nations? The homogeneity of a nation, people who are singular minded and all gather together under the banner of a flag or other idea, such as we do here in the United States. We don't have the birthright of kings. We don't have a caste system. We have a flag and a constitution that we all adopt. And by doing that, we become Americans. So we don't have to share generations of ethnic background. We don't have to share anything but really just a common language and a singular purpose to support our constitution. That's what makes America so great. Well, how do you destroy that kind of power? You have to destroy the unity. You have to introduce other languages. You have to end assimilation. You have to have irregular migration, which is what we have right now. So going back to this about Eisenhower, you have years later from this, and he made that statement about the highest levels of federal government and the corruption. Then you have years later, the late Herbert Brownell Jr. He's Eisenhower's first attorney general. And he said in an interview with his writer that the president had a sense of urgency about illegal immigration. This was from the very moment that he took office. He said America back then was faced with a breakdown in law enforcement on a very large scale. And he said, when I say a large scale, I mean hundreds of thousands were coming in from Mexico every year without restraint. Sounds familiar, right? So you have an on and off again guest worker program for Mexicans operating at the time, farmers and ranchers in the Southwest becoming dependent on this additional low cost, docile, illegal labor force of up to 3 million, mainly Mexican laborers. And all of these things work together to make it so that the resistance to illegal immigration was being worn down. What he did was he actually began the deportations. He began to work with the elected officials at the time, influential politicians, then Senator Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas, then Senator Pat McCarran of Nevada. And he worked against the open borders crowd and he worked with those who wanted to actually see regular migration. He began an operation. Again, I won't use this terminology here, it's a slur. And when he began that, 750 agents swept northward through the agricultural areas. They apprehended thousands of migrants a day. Over 50,000 were caught in 2 states. Another 488,000 fearing arrest fled the country. And that's what has to happen again. Thank you so much for actually caring about this issue. I encourage you to talk to your congressmen and your senators about it and make sure they understand you'll be voting on this issue. We'll be back with more Stacey Washington now after this.